so I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. I pray that you've had an awesome Tuesday. I know for those of us who are here in Johannesburg, we are feeling the cold front, but we shall be warmed by this gathering as friends and family, and we pray that what we're going to be discussing today will add fruit to your life. I think there's just so much going on right now in South Africa, specifically around gender-based violence. So today we have the pleasure of having Dawn join us today to just speak about it from the male perspective, right? So from the male perspective and the church, and I'm not going to go too deeply into it because I don't want to give away everything that she's going to speak about. But before we delve deeper into it, I'm just going to open with a word of prayer, and then Maddie, I'll hand over to you. So let's pray. Our Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for the blessing of this gathering, Lord. We thank you for everyone that's here and for everyone that's coming through and for everyone who will watch this once this is all over, Lord. I pray that we may come with hearts and minds that are willing to learn, to listen, and to grow from this, Lord. I pray for Dawn as she shares with us her expertise and her thinking around this issue, Lord. I ask all this in your wonderful name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So yes, just as I'd mentioned before, as you know, we have Woodward Dialogues every Tuesday. And when we first started, we were really trying to talk to each other just about the challenges of dealing with COVID, and being under lockdown. And in South Africa, it has, what has materialized is actually gender-based violence has actually gone up in South Africa during lockdown periods. And yes, it has been a pre-existing issue, but I think it has really come more to bear with some really horrific cases happening in South Africa, specifically the one of Tshegofatso, who it turns out the wife of the man who she was with hired a hitman. Crazy story. And Tshegofatso was 8 months pregnant, and I believe her family found her hung on a tree. So some really horrific stories. And we have Dawn, who's going to be speaking to us just around the issue of GBV, the male perspective, and the church, and how we can just see if there's a new way of addressing this issue. Maddie, I'll hand over to you to just introduce Dawn to us.
Okay, hi, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hey, actually, it's such an honor and a privilege for me to be asked to introduce Dawn. I've actually known Dawn since, should have been around 2006, when she was working in Johannesburg with the United Nations. But I actually met Dawn at Sandton SDA Church, and we've actually had some pretty crazy stories and some fun times together. Back then, we were very young. I mean, that's almost 15 years ago. I do recall a time when we even drove to Zim in my little car then. And then on the way back, Dawn insisted on buying a life-size statue. How we fitted it in the car, I still don't remember, and how we got it over the border. But anyway, we've had some pretty crazy fun times back then. And for many who didn't know us in those times, I actually met my husband through Dawn, my husband Sebastian. So I have a lot to thank Dawn for, because if she hadn't come into my life, I wouldn't be hiding in this room away from my husband and my kids. So thanks, Dawn, for that. So back to the introduction. So in terms of Dawn, she is just an amazing, very tall, beautiful professional woman, a great friend, prayerful woman, and a very strong woman. I mean, even when I was engaged to Sebastian, she insisted that we go into a season of prayer and fasting about it. She even sat me down, is this what you really want? She prayed over me. I mean, that is what you expect from friends, friendship. And for any woman to work in northern Nigeria, has to be a strong woman. So she's got an amazing, she's got amazing accolades and things behind her name, but I know her personally as a great woman. She's also a great poet. She wrote me a great, Sebastian and I, an amazing poem for our wedding, but she also is an author. And also one of her published books is Moments, a Poetic Heart Journey, for those who want to look it up. She has been working for the United Nations, I think, since around 2003 to date, which is quite a long time. So she is experienced. I know that currently she holds the title of advisor of the United Nations Population Fund in the gender and gender-based violence. So if anything, she is very well positioned to talk about this topic with us today. So, in a nutshell, I can't go on and on. I also have many stories. We spent a lot of time together here. So I just hope that you'll all be blessed. And Dawn, it's great to see you again. We're waiting for you to come back again. But I wish you all the best and thank you for coming through for the talk. Thanks, Larissa.
Thank you so much, Maddie. I love to hear the history. I want to hear more. You've given us tidbits. I'm like, okay. Quickly, family, you know how we roll. Keep your mic muted, but please do comment. And if there are any specific issues that you want Dawn to cover, you're more than welcome to send it directly to the Metro Mission account or to Katleho, who's also part of the team. And once Dawn has finished speaking, I know she's going to be asking a couple of questions and prompting you. Just put up a hand or indicate in the chat if you want to speak or switch on your camera, and then we'll be able to see you. So Dawn, over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Larissa. Maddie, oh my goodness, yeah, we could tell stories for years. And that statue you're referring to, it's actually in the backyard now. It's the talk, it's a central part of the conversation anytime anybody goes back there. So thank you for lugging it over the border and making sure I have it. And thank you for that beautiful introduction. You truly are the sister of my heart. Yeah, my brother's wife, so I gotta love you the way I love him. A very special thank you to Errol and Paulette. When they reached out to me, naturally my answer was going to be yes. Santon Church was my home church while I lived in South Africa. So you all are very dear to my heart. And so naturally my answer was going to be yes. But I'm also very grateful to our Father, Daddy God, for opening up opportunities like this. As I've been saying to my friends, people are complaining about being locked in home and not having the space to do what you want to do and feeling confined. But the reality of this is that we're never going to have this kind of time again in our lifetime. This happens like every 100 years, So though there are so many downsides to COVID-19, there are some upsides as well. And one of them is that we are able to be online and use these online platforms for ministry. And if COVID didn't happen, for example, I know that I would not be able to have this conversation with you at this time of day because I'd be in my office, or at worst, I couldn't afford to fly to South Africa to have this conversation. So indeed, there's some blessings that this has presented to us, and very grateful and thankful to you for the chance to have this conversation. So I'm not going to use a lot of data. I do have some facts I want to put forward in our conversation. But I'm hoping that this will be an interactive dialogue. So there are a few questions that I've posed, and thank you in advance, Larissa, who is going to be showing the slides and also fielding the questions as they come in from you in the chat box. So let me start with just saying a little bit about COVID. There's not much to say because we all know the impact of what this pandemic is doing. One thing for sure is that COVID-19 does not discriminate, but the impact of this epidemic is definitely having a far greater impact on women. And one of that is that gender-based violence, for example. And we know that gender-based violence did not begin with disasters like COVID, but the chaos and the instability that disasters like these cause really leave women and girls a lot more vulnerable than they were before. And so what COVID has really done is to move these inequalities from theory to reality. And what's happening is that we are all living this and experiencing it at the same time. So this is a global epidemic, and all of us are responding at the same time. So what do the numbers tell us? So just to give 3 stats. Globally, we know that almost 250 million women and girls between the ages of 15 and 49 suffer either physical or sexual violence, and this is at the hands of their partners, and this happens every year. So 250 million women and girls per year. For the UN Population Fund, the agency that I work for, we did a research recently that made some projections, and what we're able to identify is that if this lockdown continues for 6 more months, 31 million additional gender-based violence cases can be expected. And for every 3 months thereafter, when the lockdown continues, an additional 15 million additional cases of gender-based violence are expected. And when we look at South Africa, I was able to pull up this data, and I hope it's accurate, and those of you who are very familiar with the data can make the corrections after. But what I found is that in the first 7 days of the lockdown in South Africa, 148 people were arrested and charged with crimes related to gender-based violence. That's just in the first week. And in that same week, there were over 2,000 complaints of GBV that were made to the South African Police Service. And we, of course, as Larissa said, we know that before COVID, that violence was an issue in South Africa. The rates of GBV are among the highest in the world. So having set that background in terms of the numbers and what the numbers are telling us, I now would like to ask you, a very simple question, but it's an important question, because if we are going to address an issue, it's important for us to define it and that we all have a common understanding of what we mean. So the question to you, and if you can, raise hands or put your comments in the chat box, what do you understand GBV to mean? What do you understand GBV to mean? Do we have any hands, Larissa? I don't see anyone. This is not the time to be shy, because I'm going to be asking quite a few questions. So you got to be ready to interact and to have a conversation. Okay, so I don't see, Larissa, do you see anyone or?
I'm seeing from Taylor. I'm just going to read it out to you. She says here, violence committed against an individual that is linked to power dynamics related to gender inequalities. And then Katlego says, I guess violence targeted on someone based on their gender.
Exactly. Right, so both of those responses are perfectly right. And I'll just emphasize that when we talk about gender-based violence, it is not just violence against women. It's violence that is inflicted on someone on the basis of gender. And as we know, gender is socially defined, so it changes depending on what cultural context you're in. But gender-based violence can be physical, it can be sexual, it can be psychological or emotional. And so it includes things like domestic violence, sexual assault, incest, human trafficking, and so on. And the reasons for this are many and they're varied. But one of the things, and interestingly enough, this morning I was having a conversation with Auntie Gail, Gail Masanda. She called so we could have a discussion, and we always talk, and she was also wanting to pray over me for this session this afternoon or this evening in your context. And one of the things we were talking about is the fact that, GBV is an ancient sin. And I was actually going to start with an example of Jacob's daughter, Dinah, who was raped, and the consequences that came after that. But then Auntie Gail reminded me that from the very, very beginning, when Adam, when sin entered into the world, Adam's first response was to blame Eve. And that's a form of gender-based violence. So this is a very, very old, it's an ancient sin. And therefore, it means that we cannot just look at this from spiritual lens. So when I do my work for the UN, I am confined to looking at it from the science and the sociology and so on. But when I speak with my, my church colleagues, I certainly want to bring the spiritual lens in, right? Because we're talking about a spiritual warfare, and if that's the case, we cannot, respond with just physical tools. So what is the role of the church? And it has a powerful role to play. And there are many entry points that we could take this conversation in today, but what I'd like to do is to focus on masculinity, right? And what it means to be a real man. So having said that, I'm going to ask another question. Hopefully we'll get a few others to respond as well. So the question is this: when you think about masculinity, what it means to be a real man, right? When you think about that, what attributes or what traits come to your mind? And as you're thinking about that, masculinity really refers to those range of behaviors and traits that are primarily associated with being a man in a given culture. So in one culture, it may mean something. In another culture, it might mean something different, right? But this really is about how societal definitions of what it means to be a man. So from your perspective, when you think about masculinity, what comes to mind? What traits come to mind?
So maybe some of the things that come to mind for myself, Dawn, the first thing off the top of my head is strength. But the other side of masculinity is, I'm thinking more from a marital perspective, is to serve, to support, to enable, to lead, to so those are some of the things that just comes to mind when I think of masculinity. When I think of masculinity from a Caribbean perspective, is don't cry. Whatever happens, don't cry.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Right. Thank you, Errol. Maddie says protection. Katleo, sorry, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing your name. Leadership, stability, provision, protection from Taylor. Right, so all of those are traits that you think of when you think about masculinity, right? But then there is a flip side of that. So you have traits like aggression, right? Risk-taking, as Errol says, you know, men don't cry, right? You don't show emotions. There's also some expectation in terms of sex and sexuality, right? When you think about masculinity. You also, you know, for many men, they take every precaution not to be labeled as feminine, right? Also, when you think about masculinity, you think about self-sufficiency, being, you know, a risk taker. So those are some of the traits that come to mind when we think about masculinity in different contexts. So the next question to you is, what are some of those sources where, you know, men and boys learn about masculinity? Where do you get this knowledge about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a real man? The Pacific Institute says you get that from a father, from the media, social media, family, peers, media, family, school. Exactly, perfect. So I'm just gonna pick on one of those sources, and that's the media. And the reason for that is that, especially now because we're in this lockdown situation, a lot more time is being spent on different forms of media. I'm gonna pay particular attention to television. So the media plays a significant role in you know, both in shaping and upholding those prevailing notions of masculinity. I'm going to make reference to a study, and I don't want to get, you know, too much into data. I think it's really important for us to have some of those numbers in mind to inform how we're going to respond. So what's been identified is that for young people 8 to 12 years old, they consume an average of 6 hours of entertainment media on a daily basis. And this could be film, television, or video games. Whereas the teens from 13 to 18, they consume an average of about 9 hours daily. So what we're talking about in terms of actual time is like a full-time job, right? So this is the amount of time that our young people are sitting up in front of some form of media. And this is increasing, particularly as we have more lockdown and as we're going into summer, at least on this side of the globe, going into summer. So more young people are at home and restrained to these kinds of exposures. The other thing I'd like to bring into our conversation is a study that was done, and it also revealed that men who were exposed to hypermasculine media content, they later endorsed that notion that violence is manly, right? So when you think about, you know, how masculinity is defined and the fact that we spend so much time on the media, there are a lot of stereotypes that have, you know, come up, and the Gina Davis Institute did a study, and I've placed the data on the slides, not with the intention to go through them. But there are 4, you know, major stereotypes that came up in terms of when you look at television and the popular programs that are directed towards our young people, how men are stereotyped. One of them is that self-sufficiency is expected, right? So in these instances, you'll see that boys are more likely than girls to be shown without their parents. Or acting tough. So male characters are less likely than female characters to show emotions. Another stereotype is aggression. So the most prominent stereotype about masculinity is depicted in children's television is that boys and men are aggressors. You know, in boys' TV, male characters commit almost 63% of violent acts against another person. And then there are a whole stream of gendered values, right? So one of them I'll identify is that male characters are more likely than female characters to be shown engaging in risky behaviors, and we mentioned that before. So when you think about all of this, right, so how masculinity is being defined, the role that media is playing on that, the fact that more of us are engrossed in media as we're in this lockdown, what is the role of the church, right? So right now around the world, within the UN, governments, civil society, private sector, the conversation is being about how do we build back better? And of course, the church has a critical role to play in terms of gender-based violence, because not only in terms of prevention, but also intervention and healing from gender-based violence. So as the world is talking about building back better, they're talking about getting back to a new normal, right? So what does that new normal look like? And for someone like me who work in issues of human rights, we're talking about a new normal that should be right-centered, you know, that should be just, that should be decent. That's the new normal. But for the church, what should that new normal look like? Should we be talking about building back better for the now or building back better for eternity? So with that in mind, I want to pose another question to you. And that question is, what role can you or your church play in responding to gender-based violence, but thinking about it in the context of building back better? So if we're building back better in our societies, in our church structures, in our families, what role can you and your church play? While those responses are coming in, to the previous question, we had someone who mentioned school as a learning ground as well. So what role? Taylor is saying allowing more space for different expressions of masculinity. Taylor, I don't know if you want to talk into the group, but what do you mean when you say more space for different expressions of masculinity? One, if you could define what you mean by space, and secondly, when you say expressions of masculinity, what do you mean?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know if I was allowed to like talk. I was just gonna type. So I think allowing for maybe like different representations of masculinity and kind of what that looks like generally. As far as me growing up, I feel like masculinity was definitely defined kind of one way. You know, there was like the husband with you know, who was the provider for the family, and kind of spoke for the family in all things. And that was kind of what was held up as like the expression of the ultimate man. And I think that there are variations. There isn't just one way to be a man. There isn't just one expression or one way to display who you are as a male being. And so allowing or having more representation of that in the church and allowing more space for people to be themselves, I think is a place to start.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that, Taylor. And you're bang on in terms of particularly within the context of the church, right? So when we think about church, we think in terms of a patriarchal structure and how that in itself influences, informs the kinds of how do you say, inequalities that we see in our leadership in many ways. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. Any other responses?
I guess I can jump in, and it's Katleo here. I guess the first one that comes to mind is, and given the statistics you were giving Dawn of how, like, you know, young people spend almost like a day's worth of time, or a day's work worth of time in front of the television consuming, I think then the church needs to make a greater effort to I guess how to frame it, but reconstruct or deconstruct some of these ideas of masculinity. And one of them is more dialogues like this, you know, being able to have more open dialogues of this kind. But two, and as a young man, thinking about some of the young men that look up to me, if they do, but is also just thinking about the examples then that we do, or having good examples of masculinity, because I guess we live in a country as well where there aren't too many great examples of what a good man would look like. And so there is the challenge, especially for Christian men, to be an example of what a good man could or should look like. So those are the two things that come to my mind.
Lovely, thank you so much. And those are very good points. And I just want to flag the need for role models, right? So within the context of the church, what is it that the church is doing to set up role models that look different from what the media tells us that what real men look like? How are we as a church being able to counter those kinds of models, be it with our own leaders or through, you know, mentorship program, or finding some ways of linking older men with younger men in the church to show these kinds of models of what it means to be a, you know, quote unquote real man. So thank you for bringing that in as well, the whole issue of role models. Any other comments?
I see that Alex raised his hand.
Okay.
Thanks, Dawn, for a very a timely conversation, which I think should be extended to a wider audience. I think one of the other considerations that the church needs to have open dialogue on is around the cultural aspect, because that feeds in. And we know in an African context, in African cultures, it's very strong on the masculine side, on the men's side, you know. And I think having a conversation with especially young people, by first asking the type of question like, how do you define masculinity in your context? How have you grown up, and how have you seen it unfolding in your life, in your home, in your community, even in your village? And you will find that a lot of these learnings of masculinity have been passed on from the elders, and might be skewed against whether it could be gender or even other men. So I think, I don't think I have a solution, but I'm just saying, I think a conversation where we actually hear what young people are saying, maybe, or even what other men are saying, and how they believe and how they feel about it, will give us at least a solid ground to begin to build upwards, because we would at least know where we're at right now or at a particular point in time.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. And Alex, actually, I didn't get a chance to say to you, congratulations on your doctoral degree. I think I did on social media. So since I have you face to face, congratulations. Very proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, certainly, Alex, the whole concept in terms of norms, right? And how those are constructed and how culture informs the structure of those. So gender norms are fluid. What it means to be male and female in the USA is not the same in Zimbabwe or in South Africa, right? So in each of those contexts, it's important for us, and even within the church, to have those conversations around how is it that we come to understand male and female to be this way? Or how is it that we come to understand the roles that men versus women play in the church, for example, right? So those are some issues of the gender and the social norms that as a church, we should be able to address, because in addressing those, then we then in turn will be able to address the spin-off effects that come from those kinds of norms, such as violence. You also touch on young people, and that will come up later on in the presentation. And I think it's so important what your mission is doing in terms of having these dialogues and having a space for young people to be able to engage with these kinds of conversations. And, you know, having them lead, like I see Larissa, and I'm sure there are others who lead these dialogues. So very important to have women and girls and young people at the seat of decision making, right? So that whatever is being decided with them in mind. There's a very popular a jargon, or maybe not a jargon, there's a popular statement, nothing for us without us. And young people often say that. So how very important it is to have those conversations with our young people. And the final thing that you said, Alex, that triggered a thought for me, and it's something I think is coming up later in the presentation, is the need to have those intergenerational dialogues, right? So you talk about young people, but having those conversations with the older members as well around these issues of gender-based violence and what the church's response can be, I think is important. And thank you for bringing those in. I see we have a point from the H's. So I'll read. Larissa, do you want to read that out?
I'm sure. Just a sec, let me pull it up. So as churches, we need to produce, in caps, engaging content as well, content that our young people can consume as an alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Larissa, this might be a good time for us to show that video clip. So just before you do that, Larissa, I just want to set this up a little bit. So the clip that we're going to show you now is a campaign that's been done by Dove with the hashtag Real Strength. And oftentimes when you think about the depiction of men in the media, you don't see them in parenting roles, right? You don't see them being soft and emotional. And Dove has picked up on this and has built a whole campaign around how to work with popular artists and sports icons to communicate a different understanding of masculinity and also what real strength looks like. So we'll play that now based on the H's comments, and then we'll come back to getting some more feedback from others. Thanks, Larissa. If it's already playing on your end, Larissa, we can't hear. And if there's a way to maximize the screen.
Let me just do this. Let me do that.
There you go. But the volume isn't coming through. Let's just try for a couple more seconds to see if we can hear, because I mean, it's such a powerful campaign. I would love for us to see it.
Apologies. Let me see. Are you able to hear, were you able to hear the sound?
No, we can hear you. We weren't able to hear the video.
Okay, what I may do is, Errol, I'll just send you the link and maybe you could share your screen and you can continue talking. Don't let's see if Errol can share from his end. Let's do that.
Lovely. All right, thank you. No problem. All right, so before I go on, are there any other comments in terms of your role or church role that you want to bring in before we move on to the next points?
Share screen with me, Larissa.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any other comments. So while we're getting that share screen sorted out, so I'll continue with a couple of other suggestions. So I'd like to bring into this conversation now some proposals in terms of what the church can do in tangible ways. When we think about where we are in the world's history, I know that we're contending with COVID now, and I know that we are paying attention to getting through this time and getting back to work, rebuilding our economies and all of that. But I think this is a time where God is really trying to get our attention. And it's an opportunity for us to be able to reach the masses in ways that we were not able to do before, particularly because we have access to these social media platforms. So one of the things I'd like to bring in is the role around advocacy. And I don't know how, I know Errol and I know Paulette and I know you think outside the box. I know that the whole concept of the mission came out of the box thinking. So I don't know what the church's position is in terms of forming alliances with the government, right? But I just want to put this in for your consideration. So there is a commitment, a sexual reproductive health commitment to peace in the home that was signed by a number of governments, including the government of South Africa. And it was signed by your Minister of Social Development, Lindiwe Zulu. And this commitment, in this commitment, member states are making the charge that they will protect sexual and reproductive health and rights and promote gender responsiveness in the COVID-19 response. And this was signed on the 6th of May. It provides a tool for advocacy. So if there's a way to hold your government accountable for something that they've signed on to do in terms of protecting the rights of women and girls as it relates to ending gender-based violence, this is a tool that could be used. So maybe this is for the leadership of the church, that I just want to put this now to you for consideration. Is this something that could be a viable option that could be used by you in terms of looking at one thing the church could do?
Maybe I can just respond to that. I think one of the unique features of Metro is that it was birthed in the context of an NPO, which is a non-profit organization. We have yet to activate that arm of the ability of the church being an NPO, where we can certainly engage that particular dimension that you've spoken about. But also one of the things we're considering is how we can then, once we have defined the position that we're wanting to take as a church and what we want to be known for, that we can also then begin to derive funding through government sources that enables us then to accelerate our presence in terms of our agenda around GB, gender-based violence. And it is something we are certainly then considering.
Okay, good. And I'll share this this commitment with you, Paulette and Errol. But it really is, I think, a powerful tool that can be used in terms of advocacy. Earlier, Alex brought up the idea in terms of youth and engaging with our young people. And this is a young people's forum. So I'd like to get your perspective in terms of how is it that as young people, let me say a little bit more before I ask the question. So in my area of work, part of the conversations that we have with our young people is not just having them involved at the point when programs are being implemented, but having them involved at the points where programs are being conceived. And so more and more you see young people are advocating for their rights to be at the table at the point when decisions are being made. And I don't know how closely you are following the Black Lives Matters movement in the US, but this movement is being driven primarily by young people of every race, culture, creed, color, ethnicity, but it's being driven by young people. The climate change conversation is being driven by young people. The change that the church also needs, I think, should be driven by young people. So like, I recognize that this dialogue platform is one means for doing that. But I also want to hear from you, from the young people on the conversation, like what other tools can be put in place to enable you or to empower you to make the decisions that's required to address some of the issues that we discussed earlier in terms of changing masculinity, changing norms, and having a function that the church can play in doing that through the lens of a young person. So any of you would like to take that on, would love to hear your comments on that.
Insi's got a comment.
Please go ahead.
Hi, evening everyone. So I've been itching, I think, for the past 5 minutes from the first question you had asked about what the church can do. And as a young person, and like I said in my comments about also being a student teacher, I think our biggest issue that has come to us young people as we discuss amongst ourselves is that, number one, for example, we have people in our church that are known to be part of the people who like commit these crimes or oppress women and all those things, and we've seen our leaders in the church not hold them accountable. So that then feeds into a whole cycle that younger people see that the older men in our church are getting away with it. Then it just occurs. So we need to start at holding people accountable in a way that does not, like, I would say in a spiritual way. We need to come together as a family, find a way to hold those people accountable so that we can unlearn the different characteristics that feed into gender-based violence. So that's, for me, that's number one. Because if we're being honest, we do talk about these issues. I've been part of Metro since 2015, and I went to a very traditional church. And I must say that in Metro specifically, we've had instances, or we've had these talks, we've spoken about them. However, we know that, you know what, people are still being affected by them. So we need to come up with strategies that will help people. I don't know if it's counseling, like, you know, if it's having a safe or private email, some sort of thing where people can open up, because not everyone wants their dirty laundry aired out. So we need to create a safe space that will help the community, the church community, then that we can also take and implement in our wider community. So yeah, that's just my suggestion, and yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Points well made. No, I mean, really no need to repeat, but I would want to emphasize, sorry, is your name Ense? I got it, Ense, okay. So Ense, thank you for those points. I want to emphasize something that you said, which is a part of the presentation, so I'll bring it in now, which is in terms of creating safe spaces and what safe spaces look like, right? So when you think about it in the context of what our governments have signed on to for the rights of all people, everywhere where women and girls operate should be a safe space, everywhere. At the bus stand, on the bus, at school, online, at church. Church is not always a safe space. And now with COVID, because of the lockdown, we also we know this before, but it's being reinforced that home is also not a safe space. So when women and girls are not able to be safe in the basic spaces where they operate or in the spaces where they live, what role can the church play in this, right? And I love what you say, Ense, in terms of that we have the talk. So we talk all the time, and yes, we're great at talking, but what are the actions that can be taken? So for example, one of the things that we see particularly happening there's some examples coming out of Latin America, again, going back to my work experience. And because women are locked into their homes with their abusers, they're not able to make calls to helplines like they normally would, because obviously they're locked inside the homes. And in many cases, many of their cell phones have been taken away because now the household can only afford to have one phone. It's the husband's phone. And so what many of these helplines have done is to create codes. So when a woman calls, for example, she calls into a helpline, she makes an order for medication as if she's calling to a pharmacy, right? Is this something that the church can do? Can we set up these or support these kind of helplines if they exist in South Africa? If they don't, is this something that you could take a role in, right? The other thing to think about is the fact that women are locked into their homes. So can you provide a space? I don't know, and obviously I haven't been to the Metro Mission as yet, and I remember Santon Church did not have the space. But can spaces be provided in your church location as an alternative for women and girls to go to, right? And you then can create what's called a safe space for your church and advertise it. So women and girls will know, if I need to get to someplace safe, the mission has this space. I can make this call, I can use this code, I can go to this space. So those are some things that could be considered. And said, thank you very much for your thoughts, because you triggered for me some of those suggestions that we can put in for considerations as well. So the video is ready to be shown. So let's take a look at that, then we'll come back to getting some other inputs. Over to you, Errol. Okay, we may be having a technical challenge here. Still not having the volume, Errol, no sound. Okay, so maybe what we can do is share.
Yeah, I was just thinking, sorry, Dawn, we'll share it in the WhatsApp group.
Yeah.
Afterwards, yeah.
Great, thank you, Larissa. It was a good attempt for us to try to show it in the Zoom talk. But it's a 1-minute video, and what it does, it shows men in their role, their parenting role, in a different light than you normally would see them. So again, like when I saw the video that came out advertising this dialogue, and as Maddie said to me, our communications team is good, and I responded to her to say, yes, they are very good. So you obviously have the technical capacity within your church to create videos of that caliber, right? Is this something that your church would consider doing? Having an alternative to what masculinity looks like, both within the church and without, and how that can help to contribute in reducing violence. So I'll just leave that there as a suggestion. And the last couple of points I'll make, and then I'll just open it up for general discussion, is the very specifically talking about your role as an individual. And these are some things I'd like to suggest for your consideration and to see how best they fit with you, and even if it can be applied at a corporate level as well for the church. So the first thing is to challenge your own expectations of how men and women should act. And in doing that, to also model the behaviors you want to encourage, right? And I'm saying this in a context where we are in our church structure. It's very hierarchical, that is known, it's very patriarchal. Again, I know that the Metro Mission is a different setup. So it actually does provide the space for you to do some of these thinking outside of the normal, Adventist traditional box. So how do you challenge, first of all, your own expectations of how men and women should act? And the process of doing that, how do you then in turn model behaviors that you want to encourage? The other thing I would suggest is to call out harmful stereotypes when you see them, right? It's not okay to be silent. It's not okay to make compromises. When you see harmful stereotypes, it's most important for you to speak out against them. And this would be in the context of the church, in the context of family, in the context of society, that we have to be brave about calling out what we see as these stereotypes that are harmful. Also, especially for parents, I'm going to say you because I don't have children, but parents, from what I've read, have hesitations about talking about their own fears and uncertainties and their disappointments. And particularly in the context of COVID, where we are right now, there is a lot of fear. There is so much that's unknown. There's so many uncertainties. Take this opportunity to talk openly about these fears, right? Or young men should not feel like it's not okay for them to cry. They should not feel like it's not okay to express their stress or whatever other emotions they're feeling in the way that is most comfortable for them. Because in restraining those kinds of expressions, it later results in the kinds of violence that we see in society. So as much as possible for parents to open up those spaces where you can have those conversations, and maybe the same thing for church leaders as well, to create those spaces for the conversations around the fears and uncertainties that we're facing in our societies today. I said this before, but identifying positive role models, I know your church has a lot of them. what are you doing with the men in your church who are making a difference? And I'm sure that you're doing some things. Obviously, I'm not aware of those, but I would say to emphasize those in the context of, you know, responding to gender-based violence and preventing those kinds of violence to happen in the church, as well as in society at large. And the final thing on my suggestions for the role that you as an individual and the church can take is to speak up when you hear disrespectful comments. I have heard it from pulpits. I've heard it in, you know, in church meetings. And sometimes, you know, when you just stop and sit back and listen to some of the terms that are used in our churches, you come to realize that the level of disrespect, both in terms of understanding roles, gender roles, that you hear in the church is something that we need to speak up against as well, because the church is not immune. Gender-based violence is not just happening in our communities, it's happening in our churches as well, because our churches are a microcosm of the society at large. And then I think that's the very last thing I'd like to say. And I said this before, but again, just to emphasize the opportunity for your church to open up spaces for victims of domestic violence, you know, spaces where they can ask for help, and there might be a coded way for this to be done. Or, you know, because women find it hard to go against cultural norms, they expect to be quiet, to be silent about this, but there might be opportunities that your church can use to open up a space for women and girls to speak out on these issues that they're facing. So I'll stop here, and I'll just open it up now for any general comments that would like to come in from the participants in terms of what they've heard, and the role that your church can play in terms of addressing gender-based violence, and the role that men and boys can play as we engage them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dawn. I think you've given us so much food for thought. I saw that Luyanda, you had a comment. Do you want to unmute yourself? And for those of you who have questions, comments, please raise your hand or send a question directly to me. We'd really love to hear from everyone. Luyanda?
Okay, hi there. Yeah, so I just want to make a comment. You know, we were speaking about certain stereotypes that are out there about what being a man is and what a man should be. I think education on what being a man should be held on both sides. So both men and women both need to be taught what a real man is. You know, because for the most part, you find where there is violence, it usually takes place in a romantic sense, or it usually takes place where two people are in some form of relationship, whether it's marriage or they're usually marriage or something like that. And for the most part, you'll hear notions like a nice men finish lost. This is a very common saying, you know, nice men finish lost, because find women who choose men based on a certain stereotype or a certain notion of what a man should be. And usually the men that they choose aren't necessarily the best men or the, you know, necessarily, you know, the best example of what a man should actually be. So I think the education needs to happen on both sides. Both women and men need to be taught what an actual man should be, you know, because you'll find in certain instances women making bad choices, you know. And I also feel like I generally don't like looking at things from a binary point of view, you know.
Yeah.
For the most part, we always make it seem as if men are the problem. Men, and we never look at some of the stuff that women do that is actually very problematic, you know. You know, things like emotional abuse, something that women can also do, you know. You know, there's a lot of terrible stuff that women do as well, and we also need to be willing to look at those issues as well, not just looking at things from the point of view, you know, just bashing men and making it seem as if men are the only ones who can be perpetrators. Women can also be perpetrators as well. So we need to look at it from both sides.
I don't know, Dawn, if you want to get like 3 hands at a time and then speak. Taylor, you wanted to say something? Taylor, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Just continuing on from what he was just talking about, I feel like we're talking about a couple of different things. So one, I think maybe we should, instead of trying to define what a good man or a good woman is, that we need to talk about healthy relationships, because womanhood and manhood looks different for everyone. Like, there are billions of expressions of manhood and womanhood. But what we can really define are, what are healthy relationships? What is a healthy way to be in a relationship with someone, particularly romantic relationships, but not just romantic relationships, because we learn these behaviors throughout our entire lives, right? In all kinds of relationships. So that's one thing. And then also with, I understand not kind of wanting to like focus on men, or that men are the only people who can perpetrate this violence. But I think that in trying to say like, yes, well, women can be perpetrators too. Absolutely, 100%. But there are certain systemic and structural things in place that keep many women as the victims of this, right? There are things in place that's the reason we're seeing this happen so badly towards women, and we don't really see it that often. Not that it can't happen, but we don't see it that often towards men, particularly because of these systems that and these cultural attitudes and persistent things that are very deep rooted. These are not things that are easy to challenge, but it's up to us, like as individuals, to both learn and unlearn the things that are not leading to the outcomes that we want. Because if we want women to be choosing partners who are healthier for them, one, they have to understand healthy relationships, right? But then they also have to feel as though their value is not tied up in achieving a relationship.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
They also have to feel very confident about being on their own and self-sufficient, and understand that a man is a plus and not a must. And as much as I used to get annoyed with my dad saying that kind of stuff to me, I understand why he said it. Because if you can't be, or if you feel as though you are going to miss out on some very important social capital by being single, then that is a structural, you see what I'm saying? That
Yeah.
it is something that's keeping women in a certain position. So I feel like we're bringing some things out, but I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the different things, the very multifaceted and multi-layered conversation that this is.
And I think going to be useful as we're talking. So firstly, heads up, we're clearly going over time. I'm very cool with staying on, so it's a really good conversation. I think we really need this. So just a heads up for everyone. Secondly, if we could think of, when we're talking about emotional abuse, what is emotional abuse? How does that look like? When we're talking about these structural issues, be it patriarchal, what does that look like? And if we could give examples. I'm just going to read one of the private comments that I got, and then Dawn, you'll speak, and then Nancy, I'll come to you. It says here, violence in GBV implies some type of physically inappropriate interaction. Is the focus of anti-GBV activism not too narrow in that it addresses the symptom, not the root cause? I think all of those comments sort of come together. But yes, over to you, Dawn, and then I'll come to you, Nancy, afterwards.
Okay, lovely. Oh, wow. I love the way this conversation is going. I'm going to start off with Taylor. Actually, let me start from the beginning. I didn't get the name of the gentleman who spoke.
Leander.
Great, Leander. So there's the whole conversation around the binary, right? It says one or the other. And certainly that's not the perspective that we want to bring to this conversation. one of the things that when we say gender-based violence, it's such a wide category, right? So it could be violence that's perpetuated because you are male, because you are LGBTQI, because you are woman. But I think that the bulk of today's conversation was really about violence against women, right? And in many cases, we also talk about femicide. So this is a specific violence that women, that's perpetrated towards women on the basis of them being women, right? And that's where the gender dimensions come in. So there really is the value of taking the conversation from both sides, but also to recognize that because of gender inequality, right? So there are some things that are different for women on the basis of biology. So they are not as strong, physically strong as men. So some of the abuse happens because of that. There's also distinction based in terms of psychology. When you talk about gender inequality, there's culture, there's economic side, there's a social side. So there are a number of dimensions that tie into why it's important to have a conversation on gender, right? Because gender is not women. Gender, in many ways, get misconstrued as when you talk about gender, you talk about women. But when we're talking about gender, it's the relationship between women and men. And in many ways, those relationships are unequal. And because of those inequalities, it impacts women and men differently. So I do agree with Taylor that there is a place that this conversation needs to be had, and it could just be specifically on that. Taylor, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of healthy relationships. You know, my friends who know me very well know that, you know, I've been single for some time, and you know, I was very careful in terms of the choice that I made to have a partner, and not just to have someone for the sake of being married, right? So there's a whole conversation that we can have just on healthy relationships and what a healthy relationship looks like from a man's perspective and from a woman's perspective. So I would really suggest that maybe that could be another conversation you have, and I would be a fly on the wall if I could, if you don't invite me to be there. I'd love to hear that conversation. So I do agree that you need to have that, and to address those structural inequalities that face women and men differently. On the root causes, could not agree more. You really cannot have a conversation around gender-based violence or violence against women without looking at root causes. And when Alex was talking, we touched a little bit on the issues of norms, right? Social norms and gender norms, and how those norms get constructed. How is it that, you know, girls are known to wear pink and boys are known to wear blue? Where did that come from? And when men started to wear pink shirts and pink ties, it was like, oh my goodness, we're going against the norm. What's going on, right? Men don't get pedicure, right? So now when you have men who are metrosexual and they go out and they get their nails done, they're looked at as, you know, feminine. So how do these norms get created, right? So we're talking about those root causes. And though we might be able to talk about GBV in its wider context, we do need to look at those underlying issues, right? And particularly as Christians, and I said this at the very beginning, so when you talk about South Africa, you might want to go back to say, okay, so apartheid, right, is the reason why the level of violence in South Africa is as high as it is. But the reality is you have to go way, way, way back beyond apartheid, right? Like I said, this is the most ancient sin. So as Christians, we have to look at this from the perspective of this is not a physical war. What's happening now is that as the Bible talks about when we come towards the end of time, the angels will be pulling back those four winds, right? From withholding the protection from the earth. What we're seeing now, that's what's happening. We're living on the very tip of the end of time. So knowing that, and knowing that we're not fighting against just physical things that we can see and that we can hear, but against principalities and powers in high places, this is why the church has a specific and particular role, right? Because we can talk about healing, we can talk about restoration, we can talk about a hope that's bigger than this world. And that's where we need to really have the conversation and what is the church's role in really responding to gender-based violence in a way that is healing and a way that is sustainable beyond this world.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Nancy, do you want to unmute yourself? There's something happening with your sound, Nancy.
Yeah, sure. Sorry if I come in and out. I forgot we have a men's group here. Okay, sorry. I forgot what we have. We have, in Metro, we have a men's group. I forgot what we call it, but I don't have all the answers, but I think we can do a lot more in terms of using that group as a platform for, I think for me, a lot of it doesn't have to do with learning, but unlearning certain practices and perceptions and, you know, biases that we've been, that we grow up with. So I don't know what we can do as Metro to be using that platform more to do that kind of thing. And I just wanted to say that I think Taylor covered a lot of what I also wanted to touch on. I think for me and many women, why conversations like these become very frustrating is because many people don't, we fail to recognize, we fail to recognize that that it's not necessarily about a man versus, or man bashing or men versus women kind of conversation. It's about talking about the structures and systems that allow gender-based violence to continue. So yeah, I think if you can understand things like why saying things like all I got to, but yeah, that's what I want to say. But Taylor covered mostly what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Nancy. And I don't know if there are any other comments or questions. I mean, when we just drill down, Errol, Paulette, did you want to say something? I see you unmuted yourself.
No, probably at the end.
Okay.
Probably at the end.
I'm just thinking when you talk about healthy relationships, and I'm just going to talk about as young people, as men and women, when we're getting to know each other, what are the expectations on both ends? I think there's been some really unhealthy developments on both ends. Like, I think sometimes men feeling under pressure to provide a certain lifestyle. I've heard that a lot from guys, that they need to have things like a girlfriend budget. You know, you gotta pay for her hair. It's weird things like that. And as a woman, on the other hand, like this pressure to look a certain way, to act a certain way, to sort of, what's the word? To, I'm struggling to find the word, but to act like a wife before your girlfriend. So you sort of like on display so that you can be attracted, and you need to show certain values or act a certain way to be seen as attractive. So I think on both ends, those are just some unhealthy things that we develop. And I don't know who came up with these rules, but that's what I find sometimes. I hear conversations on both ends about, and then I find that then as two different people, we're not able to just come to the table and just be like, hi, I'm Larissa, you are Tom, or, you know, or Tabo, like, what are you about? You know, what do you want for your life? What do you believe in? But all of these added pressures, I think, that really impede people from just getting to know each other. And those pressures, I think, can sometimes manifest in some really nasty ways, just off the top of my head. And Insia has just mentioned something really powerful. I think the many segues that are happening. We definitely need to talk about healthy relationships. And Insia is just talking about if we can talk about childhood traumas and the role these traumas play in GBV. We haven't covered that at all. What we saw in the home and how that has affected how we see men and women should engage in relationship or romantic relationships, or even in the workspace, you know. In the workspace, sometimes you're meant to call each other by first names, but depending on the race of who your boss may be, maybe he wants to be called Mr. X, but if you're working in other workspaces, you're meant to call each other by first names. But when you go home, you sort of need to fold that away and switch into another sort of cultural thinking. If there are no other thoughts or comments, Dawn, I think you can cap everything off. Unless Errol and Paulette, you want to say something?
Yeah. Paul, do you want to say something?
So Dawn, I think, and Larissa, both of you have worked very well together. I think that so much has been brought up, and it's very clear that we cannot, to Alex's point, cover everything in an hour or an hour and a half. So Dawn, I think we would really like to be at your behest and invite you back, because what you have been able to do brilliantly from your vantage point is to get us to talk about the things that we have come to take for granted, but we really have not even paid much attention into what am I actually saying by holding that thought or that belief? What am I propagating? What am I meaning? And really to get us taught, because the one thing I know is we are serious. We want to be activists, so to speak, but if you don't know how to begin in your own personal environment, then how are you even going to impact somebody else? So that's just my thinking.
Yeah. And just from my vantage point, this subject is such a complex, multi-layered, multifaceted issue when it comes to the notion of gender violence, and between perpetrator and perpetrated, and all that goes with it. And sometimes as a as a church leader, I think one of the things that I really want to embrace, and I think we have sought to try to embrace at Metro, albeit not perfectly, is to find ways to coalesce the minds of our young people to help lead the conversations and the direction, and that we create the space for it so that it moves beyond conversation into a space where we can activate those conversations into reality. Mm-hmm. Some of the things that we have done at Metro have been considered to be off the chain, so to speak, or very divergent to what traditional churches do. And in this online space, some of that has slowed down because we've had to catch our breath with what's happening, where are we going, all of those things. But the next, so to speak, 6 weeks are really dedicated to having these type of conversations. So we're not just having great sermons anymore. It's conversations that are going to drive us to a particular outcome that need to be driven by all of us. And all that we as leaders are trying to do is to create the circumstance, the conditions, the space for that to happen, so that we can become very relevant in a world that demands the church to show up beyond going to the building, beyond having great church. And I really appreciate, Dawn, the fact that there are simple things that are in our power right now
to do,
that we can do. When you talked about the visual aids, and when you talked about some of the things we can do, that's in our power to do right now. And I'm really glad this is being recorded, because I certainly, for one, I want to watch this again and digest it, and then throw it out and say, well, these were some of the suggestions. How can we begin to put some of that stuff together and get the bright minds of all of us to come up with a way in which we can then position it correctly? So I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I don't see any other comments. Though what I was looking for is audition, Dawn. That's what I want to say. That I find that as women, sometimes there's an expectation to audition to prove your womanhood, to deserve the relationship, as Taylor was alluding to earlier. But yes, you can close off.
Okay. Wow. Larissa, you're amazing. You are amazing. And I think in my text message I said you're awesome. So no, you're awesome and amazing. Thank you. It was great to work with you. For someone who I met literally an hour or so before this conversation, it feels very much like we've known each other for a while. So thank you for being as open and transparent as you are. And of course, Aaron and Paulette, we go way, way back. So this felt like talking to family, to be quite frank. So thank you for creating this safe space to have this conversation. I just want to wrap up with kind of bringing back into the conversation the things that we talked about, because like I think it's Edse who said, we talk a lot, and I think the time now is to see how we can move to action, right? So the whole conversation about building back better, I really want to emphasize that for Metro Mission. We're going to open up our societies very soon. There is no doubt about that. When we open back up, how are we going to be? Like, we really have to look different. I've sat well, forced to sit into church services because I'm asked to make a presentation. So I'm there from the very beginning. And churches on Zoom are literally operating church like they were in the building. This cannot be, right? So we have these grand opportunities before us now. When we go back into whatever the new normal is going to be, what is Metro going to look like? Right? Are you going to be the place where a woman who's being abused knows, I can go to Metro because they have this center that's been set up, I can have this service, I can do this, right? So the whole concept of that safe space, I think I can't remember who, I think it was Nancy, but I don't remember who brought it in, or Taylor, but such a powerful suggestion. And advocacy, like the role that our governments and as civil society, as citizens, to hold our government accountable, right? So when your government, your South African minister comes to the UN and signs a commitment, that's a commitment on paper, but then you as citizens have that paper to hold your government accountable. And I think the church, and I had this presentation a couple of weeks ago with my church here in New York and her role in social justice, we have a role to play. Right? And you have a role to be the voice to advocate to your government, to take to action, to take to task what they committed to do on paper. So I'd say for sure that advocacy needs to happen. And yes, Paulette, I would love to come back. Thank you for the invitation. I think, let's make this a series on NSE's point about trauma. Like, have a specialist to come in to have that conversation about how childhood traumas actually translate into the kind of violence that we're seeing in our societies today. So however I can contribute to your next conversation, I am making myself available. And again, thank you for the opportunity to witness and to be a minister in this way. Very much appreciate it.
Dawn, thank you. Wow, amazing. And maybe, Dawn, you may know of others in the space that you operate in that can speak to us in those different stratas of matters that could make these conversations very worthwhile as we engage.
Yeah. Dawn, if you wouldn't mind closing for us in prayer. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Please join us every Tuesday at 7 o'clock. We're going to be having similar discussions on as was mentioned, over the next couple of weeks specifically on this. So please invite a friend and come through every Tuesday evening. And yeah, I think we can just close in prayer, Dawn, if you could pray for us.
Okay. All right. Let us pray. Oh, Daddy, our Father, we love you so much, and we're so very grateful that you are with us no matter what platform we find ourselves on, because you are the ever-present God, the God who never leaves us, who never forsakes us, the God who is with us in times of trouble, times of fire, times of flood, times of pandemic. You are the consistent God, and we thank you so much for this opportunity that you've given to us to talk about the issues that are so dear to our hearts, dear God. Your daughters are being beaten upon, being trodden underfoot, dear God, and you are the God that stand on the side of the oppressed. And so, Father, we ask you, please, as your people who you've called to this mission, dear God, I pray that you will open up our minds, give us new ideas and fresh ways of thinking, that we'll be able to make a contribution or make contributions that will change the lives of women and girls and our societies at large. We thank you, God, for the opportunity to be ministers with you to finish this work. We know that Christ is coming back soon. We're so excited about that. But Lord, we also want to be able to empower others, to help them to be ready and to be happy to see Jesus come back as we are. Thank you so much, Father, for hearing this prayer. Please bless this church, dear God, this mission that you have set up that is doing this amazing work. Continue to be with their leadership, with Errol, Paulette, and all the others who are leading. And this band of young people, dear Father, that you've called to do this work, may you empower them, may you strengthen them, may you give them insight and foresight to make the change, to make a difference in this world that we live in. Thank you, Father, for hearing our prayer. Thank you for answering. For what we fail to ask you, our God, please do not fail in granting your mercies to us. These things we humbly pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Family, you know how we do. Switch on those cameras. Let's see everybody. Say hi to Dawn. I'm sure she'd love to see everybody.